Let's just jump right into it. All right guys, so we started shooting the chair, the Kodee-Three chair video. What we're doing is we're opening up pre-orders right now. So if you want to get your templates now, you can order them. We're also going to have some paper templates for the backrest and the seat that we'll include. Get these now. That way when we hit 20,000 subscribers and then we release the video, you'll have everything you need to follow along right then and there. You won't have to wait for these to arrive.
I'm just going to check now. I'm going to be so distracted all day if it's not out yet. It's not here yet. Come on. This is so disappointing.
So our templates, we're not going to send out the traditional 1/4 inch thin templates. We're going to send out full-size usable templates. I use 3/4 inch MDF because they stay stable and you have a lot of space there for your bearing for your flush trim router bit. So this is what I love to use. I don't like using 1/2 inch. I don't like using plywood. I don't like using 1/4 inch, so instead of sending you something that you need to trace and then cut out a thicker piece, I'm just going to send you what you can actually use. We engraved the name on them, Kodee-Three. We have our logos on them, and they are going to be exactly the way you need them. And yeah, get them before the video drops, so you're ready to go. Yeah, that's it. Let's get it.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Picking up from where we left off yesterday, we're going to cut the profiles of the legs. We got the rear leg profiles to cut out and we got the front leg profiles to cut out. There are a few different ways to do it. We're going to show you both methods. The first method, we're excited to try out our new CNC machine. So we're going to cut these profiles, all 4 leg pieces on the CNC, and we're going to kind of show you what that looks like, and then we'll show you another method later on today. Okay, so what I did here is I entered in my job setup to the size of my piece. And then I laid out my pieces of MDF onto the board, get an idea of how I want to lay them out. And I can see that they can all fit on here. It would be even easier to do if you were just cutting this out on a bandsaw, and it would be easier to fit everything on one board if you're cutting them out on the bandsaw and then using a flush trim router bit on your router, which is what we'll do next. Doing it on the CNC, it's a little bit harder to fit everything on here because you have pieces that are going to break off that could mess up your profile. It could be flinging them everywhere. And also I'm going to be using a 3/8 diameter bit. So I need to have at least 3/8 of an inch between my pieces, which is not true when you're cutting them with a bandsaw. You can have just a sliver in between your parts and you can still make it work. So ideally, if you're cutting this out on the CNC and it's this tight, what you want to do is you want to leave yourself tabs so that this whole piece stays as one unit. That way you don't have, when I cut through here, this piece is going to break off. And when I cut through here, this piece is going to break off. This is going to break off. And we're going to have a bunch of broken pieces that could potentially get in the way of the router bit and cause a shift and move our piece over and cause a lot of damage.
That's a lot of damage.
So ideally you would leave tabs to keep everything as one, but we have a vacuum table here and we are gonna try to test the limits and see what this thing can do. This is like really tight. To try to cut all this out on here, we're gonna have a tiny little piece here, a lot of tiny pieces that I'm not really sure what's gonna happen. So it could be good, it could be bad, but we're gonna find out. The way that I'm doing this is I have 2 tool paths. The first tool path is gonna leave an onion skin, as they call it. It's gonna cut all the way through the material and it's gonna leave just a little sliver of material at the bottom there. And then I'm gonna come back with a full depth cut and I'm gonna just run this tool path much slower. I'm gonna have a piece here that's gonna break off, a piece here that's gonna break off. I'm gonna have a lot of weird pieces going on here and we're hoping that none of those get in the way of our bit. So let's give this a shot and see what happens. Okay, so we got done with the first profile cut that left an onion skin. I'll show you what that looks like here. Right after we show you what that onion skin looks like, we're gonna run our final, and that's gonna do a full depth cut. I'm gonna run that much slower, at only 50 inches a minute, and I'm just gonna remove that onion skin. The reason I'm running it slower is because I don't want the CNC router bit to push into my leg or into the cut off the waste pieces and cause any movement. I want it to just give me a nice clean cut. So this is what the onion skin looks like. Okay, so our pieces came out great. They came out better than I could have hoped for. We really nested those things really tight. I thought we were gonna have issues with them flinging off and getting damaged, but they worked. The vacuum held down the pieces. I didn't have to have any screws holding it in, so we're golden. One thing that I want to make sure that I mention, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was laying these out on my board, I reversed one of the legs, and I did that for a reason. The reason I did that is because if I ran them in the same orientation, I'm gonna have to to flip one of these because you have a left leg and a right leg, and the grain isn't going to match. So because I want both sides of the leg to have this a similar grain, so if you're looking at the chair from any side, I want it to look like the same wood. So because of that, I mirror the leg profile so that you have the same type of grain on both sides of the legs. Don't forget to do that. If you do forget to do that, it's not a big deal. You'll just have a little bit mismatching in your grain at the end. If you want to get really picky, and you have like the money and the time and the wood to do it, you can mill up a whole bunch of wood, just use way more than the minimums, and then you can lay out your leg and your rear legs, your front legs, your seat, everything. You can lay everything out and orientate the grain in a very specific way if you wanted to do that. If you wanted to have like very specific straight grain that looks like it's been drawn on with the ruler, you can spec that out. You can even get a slab if you wanted to. That's obviously way more money, but you can really get choosy with your grain if you aren't working with my minimums here. We got our profiles cut out. Let's move on to our glue ups that we did yesterday, the seats and the backrest, and we'll get the profiles cut out of those. And then from there we'll work on our table saw jig for cutting our angled mortises into the rear legs. Okay, so now that we got our profiles cut out for our legs, we're gonna go ahead and get our seats out of the clamps, and we're gonna get the profiles lined out in those, and we're gonna cut those out too. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get off some of this excess glue.
That comments and says that I used too much glue. So today what we're gonna test is if you can even use too much glue. Because here's my theory.
What I should have done yesterday after I glued this up, wait a few hours, and just as this gets hard enough to where I can scrape the glue away and it doesn't smear all over the place, there's like a sweet spot. You find that sweet spot and then this stuff will scrape right off, and you do that while it's still in clamps. That'll save you a lot of time, but I didn't have time to do that yesterday, so now we're gonna have a little bit of a harder time getting this glue scraped off, but we'll get it.
You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, a willing.
So when we're scraping our glue off, we have a lot of different tools that we can use to make that happen. These are the 4 main tools that I would use for that. This is an actual glue scraper. I use this a lot when I'm doing a lot of aggressive removal. If there's a lot of glue that I need to get off fast, I'll use this. I try not to go all the way down to the surface just because I don't want to get a lot of tear out. This is a card scraper. I use this one only for scraping glue. I save my other ones for finer woodworking. So this one is kind of a finish. I'll use this to, like when I get close enough with my actual glue scraper, I'll finish out with this. And this is just a really dull chisel that I keep very dull. This works really well for getting glue out as well. And this is a very nice, very sharp Lie-Nielsen chisel.
A small handle like this. But in terms of damage, it will kill.
That I use for corners like this. So if I try any of those other tools, I'm probably gonna get blowout either on this end or on this end as I try to remove that. So if I'm careful with this, I should be able to push this in a little bit on this side and then push it in a little bit on this side. I'm falling down to obscurity. Don't let me ever be this alone. I'm falling. Shouldn't be trusting me. I could be making it all. That's great. So now when we sand, we can make that look nice and perfect. Okay, so now we got the glue scrape. We're gonna just use 80 grit, and I'm just gonna sand everything nice and flat. When you're sanding the backrest and the seat, make sure not to round over anything yet. You don't want to round over anything. You want to keep everything flat. So don't round this, don't round any of this. Just keep everything nice and flat. Okay, so now that it's all 80 grit, nice and flat, I didn't round anything over. Last thing I'm gonna do is in here in these creases, I'm gonna very, very carefully tilt my sander, and I'm just gonna kind of feather out those little marks from where the glue was at. I'm just gonna do that. Take your time with this part, because if you dig too deep, you're gonna give yourself a big dip, and we don't want that. So that's what I'm gonna do now. All right, so we got the seat and the backrest all sanded. We left hard edges, so now we're gonna lay out for our contour, our profile cut. So you need to make sure that you remember which side of the seat was the back and which is the front, because when we're laying out the profile, we wanna know what the back is. That way when we're cutting our profiles, we don't accidentally hit any dominoes. Okay, before we can do our layout on the backrest and the seat, we need to get some straight lines and get these cut to the actual size that we want them in. Final for the seat is going to be 18 inches by 17 inches.
What did it look like?
What do you mean?
Just say when. Just say, seriously? Are you serious? Okay, you know, this is impossible. I'm starting over.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna straight line one of these edges now, then I'm gonna take the sled off and I'm gonna use the fence for my other 3 cuts. Okay, so our finish depth for the seat needs to be 18, so we got 3/16 of an inch to lose. So I'm just gonna take off the bare minimum that I need from here, and then I'm gonna take the rest off from the opposite end to arrive right at 18 inches. This direction, we need to finish out at 17 inches. We have about 1/8 of an inch to lose here. So when I cut these down, I'm gonna make sure that I only take off about 1/16 of an inch off of each side. If you don't land right on your numbers, it's okay. We can compensate for everything. So those are the dimensions that I designed the chair at, but if you end up a little bit smaller, it's not that big of a deal. It'll be fine. Okay, so now before I take the sled off and start cutting the rest of the cuts on the seat, I'm gonna make my straight line on my backrest first, and then I'll remove the sled. Basically what we wanna do is we just wanna we wanna keep it as big as possible for now, and we'll adjust and we'll fine tune the backrest later on. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna get a straight line on one of my edges, and then I'm gonna run that straight line up against the fence, and then I'm gonna cut the bare minimum that I need to get an equivalent parallel line on the opposite side of the backrest, and then I'm gonna cut off these angles on the backrest. From there, I can do my layout, and we can fine tune that later once we actually have the chair together in a dry fit. So now that I have my straight line on my seat, I set the fence to 18 inches, and I'm gonna cut the other end parallel. Okay, now we need to get our seat down to 17 inches wide. And you don't want to just straight line one side like we just did for the front and back and then remove the rest off of the other end. You want to make sure that you remove equal amounts. So we have a little bit of measuring to do here. So measuring this, it looks like we are a 1/16 over. So that means I need to remove a 32nd of an inch on both sides. So that's what we're going to do here. So right now, with both the seat and the backrest, we have a 12-degree angle total. So these wings are coming off. If you put this up against the fence, you can see we have a gap here. The easiest way for me to zero this out and cut this straight is I just push this all the way against there till it stops, and I know that this is flat down there. And then I just measure off the fence, and then I can see that I need to set the fence to 14 9/16. And that should put me right on this line here. So that's a little tip on how I do it. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to spin it. Put put the other side that I just cut against here. Now you can see that gap is gone. It's flat up against the fence because now this line is a 90 degree from the bottom of our backrest, which is what we want. So now I can measure from here out, and I can see that my fence needs to be set to 14 and 5/16. All right, so now that we got these cut to the right size, we're gonna go and we're gonna lay out our profile cuts for these guys. So what we got now is we're gonna measure out for our layout. It's first thing we wanna do is identify the back. So that's the back of our seat. So first thing we wanna do is we wanna come over 1 1/4 of an inch from each side. So we got 1 1/4 of an inch. 1 1/4 is right here. Okay, then from that line, we're gonna draw up 4 inches. So I'm gonna drag that up to the number 4.
It's called POV.
A few moments later.
You what?
So now we're gonna go 2 1/4 from each edge. And then from there, we're gonna come up. So here's our 2 1/4 mark. We're gonna come up to 5 inches and make a mark. From our 2 1/4 mark, we're gonna come up 5 inches and make a mark. Okay, so now we're gonna measure from the front of the seat up 3 1/8. What we're trying to do is get the starting point of our front leg. So our front leg comes out to 3 1/8. That's where we want our first line.
And this is the seat, and then this is the front, and this is the back.
This is the front of the seat, yes.
Nice.
So we're gonna go 3 1/8. Same thing on this side. 3 1/8. So now we got to connect the dots. So we got a line here. That's where I want to start. We're going to go there, and then we want to adjust the back so that we are right at that tick. So we need to come in 2 1/4 and then make our center point on that guy. So we're going to come over 2 1/4 from the edge there. We're going to mark on this line here. So we're looking for 2 1/4, which is right here. And we're going to make a mark. So that's it. That's our center mark. Then what I like to do is I take my tight mark and I use this to give me okay, so that's the layout right there for the seat. Okay, so what we have for the layout is 1 1/4 of an inch in from here. Then you have a 4-inch line up to here. You have 2 1/4 from this edge over to this point and 5 inches from the back up to that point. And then you have a radius here. And then you have 3 1/8 measuring from front to there. And then you have a connecting line to your radius there. Same thing on the opposite side. You should measure 17 inches in the front, and between your lines, you should be 14 1/2.
Between this line?
Between your lines that you just drew, should be 14 1/2. So now we'll lay out on our backrest. We're gonna set this to 1 1/2 inches. We're gonna decide what we want to be our bottom on the backrest. I really like this dark here. That always looks really cool. So I don't want to cut that out. So I'm gonna make that the top of my backrest. This is gonna be the bottom. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna hold this here and we're gonna just drag a line. Okay, now we want to set the square to 1 3/4. Then we're going to come in from the side, make a mark on the bottom, and do the same thing over here. Make a mark on the bottom.
Which is just 1 3/4?
1 3/4. Now we want to use the 45-degree side of the square, so we're going to set that like that. And we're going to go to our mark here. We're going to draw a line up. And we're going to do the same thing over here. Go to our mark here, and draw our line up. So now we can erase all this.
So this is going to be completely cut out.
yet. So what we're removing is this section. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the bandsaw and we're gonna cut out these profiles. Okay, so I don't like to cut. It's really important that these straight sections are perfectly straight. So I don't cut the straight sections on the bandsaw. I only cut the curved section and this long part on the bandsaw because those don't have to be perfect at all by any means. Those don't need to be perfect at all, but these do. A few different ways that I do it. Sometimes I'll do it on the chop saw, the miter saw, and sometimes I'll do it on the table saw. Either way will work. I was gonna do it on the miter saw, but I have my sled out already, so I actually think I'm gonna do this on the table saw instead.
Do you have to cut this at a certain angle now
No.
since it's tilted? So
It needs to be cut perfectly straight.
Okay, for sure. You might have said that, but
I want to be able to see my line so I can make sure that I'm not going to accidentally go in too far. So I'm going to use this to make sure that I'm going to come up a little bit more. Same thing on the other side. One last final thing to do is to check and make sure your blade's square. That's perfect. Okay, so now you can see we have our profiles cut out for our seat, our profile cut out for our backrest. We have our profiles cut out for our rear legs and also our front legs. The next part of this build is probably the hardest part. We need to make a jig, and I'm gonna remake one just to kind of show you guys and so you can follow along, but we have to make a very specialty jig specifically for these legs to house them properly. What we need to do next is we need to create an angled dado which will house the seat. The seat is at a 12-degree angle. We need to angle it up in the area that we need, and then we need to remove all of this material. So this has got to be a perfect 12 degrees. This has got to be a perfect 12 degrees off of the face, and it's got to be the exact width of the thickness of our seat, which is roughly 1 3/8, and we got to do that. That's not easy to do because this has got to come all the way through. So it's going to be all the way through here. So next video, we're going to show you how to create the jig and how to remove that material with this angle to accept the seats inside of that.